Our question today comes from Harper. She writes that she wants to add BDSM into the bedroom with her husband of 14 years. She's been able to communicate to him that she wants rough sex and to be choked, and he'll do that. What she wants, however, is the full experience, and she asks how she can present this proposition to him.
I think that's a really interesting notion of the full experience. That language is interesting, right? I was struck by that. I wonder, how many women struggle with this idea of, well, we've got the props, but the props aren't the thing I'm after. I'm after something deeper, and I don't know exactly how to communicate about that. One of those challenges, I think, is figuring out how to discuss and how to request something along the lines of a deeper experience. And as you know, in the book, I define kink pretty obscurely, I would say. Is my working definition is that kink is savoring the intensity of sexual play with a perceptual overlay that allows for an embodied exploration of personal meaning. And that's not what most people think of when they think of, oh, I just want to be choked, or oh, I bought this toy, or, whatever. Whereas that's kind of the smoke and mirrors. That's the symbol, but it's got to be a symbol of something. And so I suspect she herself doesn't quite know exactly what she wants, but she knows she's not quite getting it just out of the actions without the intention underneath.
It's like the props that she's using is pointing to a deeper truth that she's trying to connect to, right? It's pointing to something. She can probably feel it, but she doesn't.
Yes.
She knows she's not quite there.
It's interesting. The when you say that, the phrase that comes to my mind is from The Matrix. Is you can feel it there all around you, like a splinter in your mind, right?
Yeah.
And it is exactly that. It's like, hey, wait, I'm doing the thing. I'm getting choked. Why is this not hitting for me? It's not exactly right. I think when I'm talking with submissive, part of the question I try to ask is, what do you want to feel? And why do you want to feel that? What is the intention behind that? What is it about this that you think excites you? And by asking even one layer deeper, ideally 2 layers deeper, right? So take bondage, for instance. Oh, you really like being tied up. What is it about that experience that you think is exciting? And then once that answer has been elucidated, we say, well, why? Why do you think that is so appealing? So an answer might be something, well, I really like the feeling of being helpless. I like that I can't stop you from doing whatever you want to do. Well, why is that interesting? What is it about that is exciting? And whatever that answer is usually going to be the thing. You may not need to tie this person up in order to get that psychological answer going. There may be a lot of ways of engaging, referencing the book again, but it's been on my mind since I've been editing it, I guess. But those are the archetypes, right? The notion there in this example that I'm talking about is, the evil queen and the helpless princess on some level. It's Rapunzel. It's that I want to feel helpless. I want to feel like I can't. And I talk about this all the time with you, in the past, is like, so many times, if you just tie someone up, right, and then you do only things she likes exactly the way she likes them, she won't feel very tied up. She never wanted to stop you. She never felt like she couldn't stop you because she never wanted to, right? So you have to do something. It's an odd contradiction in some sense. You have to do something that she doesn't like in order to give her the experience that she wants. She has to not like the sensation you're giving her. It has to be painful or too stimulating or too intense or not intense enough or something to where she wishes she could reach out and grab you or move you or shield herself. Or she has to have the impulse to move. And then she will feel the helplessness of being tied up, which is the experience she wants. And so
she needs to internalize the meaning of the scene, right, in some way.
Yes, that's exactly right. And as we've discussed, the 3 elements I talk about in kink are, number 1, intensity, savoring intensity. Number 2, the notion of perception over sensation. So exactly what we're talking about here is the sensation may be painful, the sensation may be unpleasant or too intense or whatever, but the perception of that is pleasurable. The perceptual overlay is, now I feel helpless. And the third, as you said, is meaning. What does it mean to be helpless to my partner's whims? Why do I want that? Why is that connecting? Why is that fulfilling for my own psyche? So, getting back to the question here, actually, I would say that I think one of the ways she can start to explore that with her husband is to ask each other these deeper questions. Why do you want to be choked? What is it about that that's exciting, right? Is it the primalness? Is it the helplessness? Is it the sensation of male and femaleness, right? The feeling of being overcome by someone stronger than yourself, the perception of strength, and it may not be just one of those, right? It may be a lot of them, but starting to dive into that, and then starting to say, well, what could we do that would play on those themes? If it's not just choking, what if I pick you up and throw you into bed? If it's the strength, then that's going to hit. If it's the helplessness, that might hit a little bit, right? But if it's the primalness, then maybe not, because you probably can't throw her without being careful, right? So, you have to do other things if you want to. I'm just riffing here.
Well, one potential way of answering the question is to emphasize that you don't want to just learn more procedure, right? It's not a lack of, well, have you tried this thing in bed? Have you tried that thing? I've heard this toy is really great, right? And those are just procedures, right? As opposed to getting into the spirit of a frame, right?
Yeah.
And that spirit is inherently relational to the other person, right? So, if she wants, as she says she wants, the quote unquote full experience, that is a very deliberate kind of turning inwards and relating to the dominant in a very specific way. And so perhaps the first thing that needs to happen in order to move towards the full experience is a conversation with her dominant, right? Where they both mutually agree upon kind of the power hierarchy, right? Even though, of course, both of them are to some extent in charge of the experience. In the moment of play, however, that submission needs to mean that she is subverting herself to some extent for the dom's pleasure, and she is doing that for a specific reason or a specific meaning, right? And that doesn't have to be foregrounded entirely. You can't just walk around thinking, well, I'm just inferior to, or subverting myself to the dominant, right? But it still has to be internalized to some extent, is that you are now in a relation to somebody else, in a certain dynamic, and you have to be very clear about that relation, right? The submissive and dominant. And then whatever you do past that, right? Even if it could be just something as simple as making him a sandwich while dressed in lingerie, right? That's a very, it doesn't
Sure.
have to be, that's not, you don't need to buy any new tools, right? There's no new procedure. That it is in some sense a procedure, but it's not so much like, the problem here is a different brand of lingerie, or this different vibrator will do the trick, right? That's the wrong direction to go in, if based on what she's saying, because she's already partly getting there, right? She says that he chokes her and ties her up and the other stuff. So they've already experimented and gone some distance with this.
Well, kind of, yeah. They have, and I agree with everything you said. Reading the question again, something pops out to me a little bit more on this, is that it says, and he will do it, right? But no indication that he enjoys it. It's a little bit like having sex with a partner that's just doing it out of duty, right? Which isn't really the experience you want. And so if he hasn't figured out his own connection with kink, it can come off a bit performative. It can come off a bit, well, I'm just doing it to please you, but I don't even really know what I'm doing here. Like, why am I choking? Like, I'm choking you because you told me to choke you. It doesn't feel very dominant, right? And I'm just following your lead in some sense, right? And so I do think, well, two things. Number one, I'd be curious, because you've had that experience, right? Like you've been with someone before you really had your sort of kink awakening, if we call it that, who wanted you to be kinky, and I like referring to it as a spiritual awakening. Um, and
Not far off.
uh, yeah, yeah. And she wanted you to do these things, and I remember you expressing kind of almost a bit
Yeah,
of confusion, right?
yeah, I remember.
And now you would not be confused. Now
Hmm.
you have the essence of that frame, and you would be able to engage in these conversations or negotiations or discussions. And before I let you answer that, I would just say the other thing is that this is also to me the distinction I make between rough sex and kink. Rough sex is just the act. It's just the toy. It's just the choking. It's just the force. Kink is what she's calling the full experience here. That's the meaning portion of the activity. Just my own personal distinction, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it was a bit of a transformational experience going through or sort of discovering the sort of king side. I remember that conversation. You were actually visiting me, and I was
Mm-hmm.
telling you about this girl that I started seeing, and she wanted me to do all these things. And you have known you were kinky for a long time, so you already clearly understood, and I had no understanding. And you tried to explain it to me, but I just was very dismissive. And it's because, when you actually engage in these things, it really changes you as a person, right? You are inhabiting a certain
Mm-hmm.
stance, you are inhabiting a certain persona, and there's a play element to it. If you don't understand what you're doing, someone from the outside might see that as very absurd, which is kind of where my headspace was at when I was telling
Sure.
about this person. It's like, oh, this is
Good
just
word.
all weird, and it doesn't make sense. There's no connection between reality and this. But then when you start to understand that you are inhabiting a role as a form of an enacted analogy, almost as a ritualized play,
Mm-hmm.
and then that kind of ritualized play can change your sort of perspective, like who you are as a person. It changes
Mm-hmm.
you, and it changes your submissive as well, and that is a very profound experience, right? And it's not even I mean, it is about sex, right? But it's not just about sex. I mean, in fact, I would even go as far to say sex is a relatively small part of
Sure.
the sex is the substrate in which it's an enacted, right? Because it's so intimate to us, right? That's probably the reason where it's
Sure.
homed there, or situated there, is because it's just an intimate, private experience.
There is a great quote. I'll just jump in. Is that everything in the world is about sex except sex, and sex is about power.
And that's
It's
not that's exactly right. I mean, and
yeah.
it is, assuming power, giving up power, when it's
Mm-hmm.
done voluntarily, when you are seen to be powerful, when you give up power. Uh, these are very transformational experiences, and that's really what's going on here, right? And
Sure.
again, I mean, the advice to her is to think about her relation to her dominant, right? And is she relating in the correct way? Is he relating in the correct way? You have to have that sort of click happen first, before you start talking about procedure. More procedure
Yes.
is not going to solve the problem.
And I guess the question comes that, how could she, assuming, again, we're a short question, we're just reading in, but if her husband is where you were, how could she start to engage? Now, with the girl you were talking to at the time, you had no commitment there. You had no
Right.
investment in figuring it
Yeah.
out. But presumably her husband does. He's doing the things for her because he wants to make her happy. He has an investment in her well being to a significant degree. What things do you think she could communicate? How could she trigger that uh, exploration?
You know, it's going to sound like a joke answer, but it's really not. I mean, one thing she could do is read your book. It's,
Hey,
that's what.
pitching for me. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there
No,
you go.
but
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is what actually changed it for me, right? I mean, you had been writing this book. You have been writing this book for years now. I completely ignored you every time you asked me to read it, and then finally you emotionally blackmailed me enough to make me read it, and then I did, and I'm like, oh God, this is actually a very profound thing, right? And that just resulted in an explosion of conversations between you and I, and it even led to this podcast being created.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what to tell her to communicate to her husband unless she understands herself what is happening, right, on a psychological level, right? Because if she doesn't understand that, she doesn't know what to ask, right? And she doesn't know how to relate to him, like at the end of the day, all of this kink BDSM stuff is all a enacted analogy. It's a really good term, a ritualized
It is.
enacted analogy that puts you in a certain kind of perspective relative to another person, right? And you have to have some understanding of that, right? Maybe intuitive understanding, but if you're not getting what you're getting from your husband, then that intuition has to be foregrounded. It has to be propositionalized. It has to be discussed. Your book is a great starting point for sure. Again, I'm not just doing that because it's not like I'm getting commission, right? I'm not getting a cut of these sales, am I? Right?
No, you're not.
In that
Absolutely
case,
not.
terrible book. Do not read.